Hey guys, I want to talk today about the really interesting question of why won't aliens land? If aliens are real and they're here, and if they've been here for a very, very long time, since the beginning, since our creation, why don't they just land right now? It would be very easy for them. They could land all over the world. They could land in a way that would be unmistakable to us. Land in every major city, or just put a UFO above every major city in the United States and all over the world, and the mystery would be over. We would know that they're real and that they're here. So why don't they do that? And it's certainly, I think it's a good question. It's certainly one that I pondered and thought about for a really long time. It's like, what are they doing? What's going on here? And I think that to answer that question, you've got to take a step back and understand what it is that we are doing here as individuals and as a race. So we have to look at it from the perspective of these advanced alien civilizations. We are in a training ground. We are in a learning environment, and we're going through a phase of development. And they understand that. So they do not want to interfere in our learning, at least the positively oriented races. They will not interfere in our learning because they understand that we have put ourselves here specifically to learn. And if they come from the outside and barge in, let's say, and just start telling us things and giving us technology or this, that, and the other, then that's an interference of our learning process, and that may not be what we want. And they have actually probably a better understanding of what we actually want than we do ourselves while we're here and incarnate, because they can communicate with us on levels that we can't even communicate on with ourselves. In other words, in our waking lives, we forget and we're cut off from the bigger pieces of ourselves, but they have the ability to communicate with the totality of a person. So it's kind of interesting to think that someone from the outside might have a better understanding of you than you do yourself, but that is true. So what they understand is that many of us right now do not want contact. We just simply don't want it. And I think you can see that when you try to talk to anyone. If you have an understanding of sort of the alien situation, and you talk to maybe friends or family, you can get a sense. If you tell them about any of this kind of stuff, they'll just look at you like you're crazy, or maybe they just smile, and nod, and then they just walk away and they do something completely different. Like it doesn't even register. They have absolutely no interest in it. And it's kind of a strange thing to experience because, for me, it's like, hey guys, can you believe it? Like, look at what's going on. And people just look at you and they kind of go, oh, well, what, I don't know. And then they go turn the TV on and watch sports or something, or I don't know. But what does that mean? They don't want to know. They don't want contact. They don't want to think about it. They're doing something with their lives. They're going through some process of learning, and that's what they want to focus on. And that's okay. That's totally fine. But we're doing that. Many of us, much of the planet is doing that on a large scale. And the alien civilizations, they understand that. They understand that many of us do not want contact, and so they're not going to interfere. And then that also means that we're just not quite ready. The level of consciousness that we have achieved as a race is still relatively low. We're not at a very high state of consciousness. And that's why, that is what not ready means in a way. We're not quite at that level. So that also makes proper communication very, very difficult, because the concepts that they would need to explain to us are concepts that we might not understand because they're so far beyond the way that we think about reality. So even if they were to land, with our relatively low state of consciousness, what kind of communication could we possibly have? Like, what could we even discuss with them? We're still, we still take the physical world as being a very, very real thing. And we're very much involved in this, creating little groups within ourselves, and everyone fighting over resources and over power, and who's going to have more power over the other, and, and things like that. And what could they possibly tell us that we could understand? About the true nature of reality and what else is out there in the universe and in other universes and in other dimensions. That bridge, that chasm between us is just too big. So even if they did land, the communication would be, probably mostly useless, because there's just too big of a gulf between us to bridge easily until we raise our state of consciousness. And so what that results in, and what that has resulted in, historically, and I think you can see it, we can see it ourselves if we look at, just in human records, and we look at what people have come across in the past and the way they've described it. That's where all this talk of angels and demons comes from. People describe seeing a demon. Well, what did they really see? Like, what is a demon? Did they actually just encounter an ET? Maybe it was a negative ET. Maybe it was a positive ET and they misidentified it. Maybe when they say that, I saw an angel came to me. What was that? So what that has resulted in is that, there has been more contact in the past. I mean, remember that we are a creation of alien races, and in particular one. But, many races took part in our creation in various ways. And there's been a lot of genetic manipulation, on the planet. So they've been here for the whole time. And there has been open contact at different times. But what they saw at a certain point is that, as the Zeta say in the Zeta interviews, it was seen that a child must learn to walk. And they saw that at a certain point they had to leave and let us develop on our own. We have to develop our own society, our own civilization. And if that takes us 10,000 years or 100,000 years, then so be it. What does it matter? We are infinite beings, just like they are. We have all the time in the world. So they mostly leave us alone. They leave us to develop on our own, at our own pace, and in our own way. We're choosing our own path of learning, and we're choosing our own path through the infinite creation. And when they have come in the past and had open contact, what the races have noticed, and this comes through clearly in what the Zeta say, and also in what Ra says, that we typically react in two ways, either with fear or with worship. So we're either afraid of the ETs, and that creates a problem because that hinders our learning, and that hinders our ability to raise our state of consciousness, because to raise your state of consciousness is to raise the amount of unconditional love that you can express, essentially. It's to raise in understanding of the unity of the entire creation, which is fundamentally love. Even if that love manifests sometimes as love of self or as love of others, it's always love. So when you are in fear, you are hindered in that raising of your state of awareness. So causing fear in us sets us back. And so they realize that affects negatively our learning process. So they don't want to cause fear. Plus, I bet you'd be really annoying. I mean, especially imagine if you're a positive being and every time you show up, people are just afraid. It's, that's not going to be that much fun. So what's the point? And likewise, what's the point in them landing and then we just start to worship them as gods? They don't want that. They're not gods. They understand that they're not gods. They understand that they're just like us, just at a different stage in the process of development. They don't want to be our caretakers. They don't want to rule over us. Because if we see them as gods, so now they have some power over us, and they can, boss us around and tell us what to do, and they're our masters, let's say. Well, then, in a way that they are enslaved to us, and they don't want that. They don't want to be sitting here. Now they have responsibility for this planet and our civilization, how it develops. They have other things to do as well. So fear or worship, either one of those is a bad response. It just shows that we're not ready. It just shows that we haven't reached levels of consciousness such that open contact is useful and is productive and therefore is possible. So, I think what they appear to do is that they're kind of periodically checking in, and they're checking on us, and they're keeping an eye on us, and they're seeing, okay, are they ready? Are they ready? How about now? How about now? And they come in and check, every once in a while, and most of the time, we're not ready. It does appear that there have been, like I said, periods in the past with much more open contact. And because the human race wasn't developed to a point where that contact was safe, there have been problems, because part of the problem of not being ready for contact with an advanced civilization is that it makes us also very vulnerable to negative civilizations. And that's happened as well. A negative group of advanced ETs can manipulate us, can deceive us, and can take advantage. And there are those groups out there, and they have their own reasons for enjoying, wanting to come and to mess with us in various ways. So that also shows that we're not, ready for open contact. And so the positively oriented races understand that even if they have good intentions and they come and they speak openly to us, even if that were to work, it would, in a sense, just make us that much more vulnerable to being manipulated by other races. So even in that sense, it would backfire. And then there are problems that can arise from specific races. Every race out there is very, very different. Some of the races, like the Zeta, what they say, what they tell us, and I believe them when they say this, because I've had my own glimpse that this is true. Is that when you are in the presence of a Zeta, because there's something about their state of consciousness, like the strength of their etheric body, which is so different and strong and powerful, compared to our state of consciousness, that when you're in your physical body and you're near, and a Zeta comes near you, you experience a tremendous amount of fear. And it's just a natural reaction. It's just a natural part of, the biology of the human body that encounters something that's so different. So you're back to that fear response, but it's not even just, with some races, that fear response may be like a philosophical fear or something like that. But with some races, it's an actual biological fear that's very difficult to control. It's just your body goes into fight or flight mode instantly, just because it's like your body is sensing an energy that is very, very foreign, and that causes like a different kind of fear. And then there's also problems with the Zeta in particular, that the way that your body might react, because the differences in their consciousness and yours are so great, that your etheric body might respond. It might react in such a way that your physical body is burned. So there can actually be physical consequences to getting too close to some of these races, and it's all related to the fact that your level of consciousness isn't quite high enough. Like you don't have the strength of mind yet to really handle it. So it can cause not only psychological issues, it can cause physical issues. In other words, you might come out of an encounter with the sensation of, being burnt, like a bad sunburn. And it's not exposure to technology, it's not exposure to radiation necessarily, it's just exposure to the consciousness, this higher level of consciousness that can happen. So that's another reason. And already it's like, at this point, it's like, okay, this is actually getting pretty complex, right? It's like, yes, it's complex, and there's a whole, there's many, many reasons why open contact right now isn't possible. Although we are working our way towards it, we're making a lot of progress. So it is going to come, and I think fairly soon. But part of the reason, part of the problem with the human race being at this stage, at this level of development of consciousness that we're at, is that we have very little control over our own consciousness. We're constantly projecting our thoughts and our fears and our emotions and our happiness and our sadness, everything out. We're projecting it out all the time. We don't even realize it, because it's not even part of our normal thought process. We don't think to control our consciousness in that way. We just think about moving our bodies around, and am I hungry? Am I not hungry? Am I sad? Am I happy? That's all we deal with. And we don't think that, your state of mind affects a whole lot more than just the physical world around you. So even if another being were to come and you were to connect with that other being, you would be projecting, even if you don't realize it, and if you're not entirely consciously aware of it, at a subconscious level, you're projecting all of your emotions and fears and stress and all of that to the other being. That other being is not going to want to connect with you telepathically. It's not going to want to connect with you necessarily, because it's going to have to deal with that. It's like, you're opening your front door and there's like a wall of mud coming at you. It's like, keep the door closed. So that's another factor, another kind of sort of drawback of us being in this stage where we don't have a very highly developed state of consciousness yet. And that's why in most contact situations, these advanced races will put, a human into some sort of state of almost like as, like a anesthetic type of state of mind or something. They kind of will put you to sleep, or maybe you will be entirely asleep and you'll be presented with just a narrative, a screen memory, just a story for your local consciousness, your local mind to understand, because you can't understand the real content because you're just not developed enough, and they don't want to deal with all the mess and the problems that you have. So better to just kind of put you to sleep in some sense, or anesthetize you in some sense, and then they can deal with you and do whatever they need to do, and then let you wake back up, and you might have some vague, fragmented memory of the whole situation. But it's in part, it's for your own protection, to protect your psyche, and it's in part for their protection as well. Or just, not that you could really hurt them, but it's just, I imagine it's just a bit of a mess, and that's also happening at the level, at the larger level, the level of the collective consciousness, that we're constantly projecting everything out, into reality. And so the mind of the human race is seen as in a state of chaos and turmoil, but it's expanding exponentially, and it's touching other races, and they can feel it. And what they feel is not pleasant, because we're not in a pleasant state of mind. So, I mean, on the one hand, that's a problem for them. On the other hand, it's also part of the reason why they're here, and they're trying to help us. At least the positively oriented races are trying to help us, because they see that we're in our learning process. We're part of this. This is a very natural development that we're going through. This is entirely normal. The way in which different races progress through it is always unique and different, but we're going through perfectly normal stages of evolution, the evolution of the consciousness of a race. But the other races, they can see that, and so they're trying to help us, but without provoking a fear response, without coming here as our saviors. It's like we need to save ourselves. We need to learn to stand on our own, and that's what they're trying to help us with, and that's what they're trying to help us achieve. And to achieve that, it's very, very important. It's critical, in fact, that we're on this path of seeking, and we're learning about the universe, and we're learning about the cosmos and our place in it. But that seeking has to be inner-directed. In other words, it has to be us awakening ourselves to our own true state of being, and we have to do that learning. That cannot be forced from the outside. We need to develop strength of mind. It's like, think of it as spiritual strength that we need to develop. And if they come in and they do our learning for us, if they come and they just say, hey guys, check it out, free energy, we already figured that out here, you can have it, that's not going to help us. That's not positive for us. That's not good. That means that we don't develop the spiritual strength. I mean, imagine it's kind of like if you're working out, and if you're working out with a partner, and you spot them when they're lifting weights, you want to just give them just a little bit of support, just if they get stuck. You don't want to lift the weights for them, otherwise they don't get strong. And the whole point is for you to lift weights and for you to get strong. And that's exactly what's happening here, except it's happening with our progression in this evolution of consciousness. We have to do the work ourselves. They can't come in and do it for us. They can't do the learning for us. So they will not interfere in our learning process. They stand back. They might provide some support, they might provide some guidance, but they will not interfere. Maybe in very extreme cases, and that's a big unknown. What if we have a nuclear war? Will they interfere? Maybe, maybe not. But I wouldn't assume that they would, because remember that the physical human race is not the most important and relevant, the most relevant actor in this whole thing. It's the consciousness of the human race. So if the entire human race is physically destroyed, well, then the consciousness that has developed to that point maybe just needs to find a new physical race to use as a vehicle for learning. It's not the end of the world necessarily for the human race to be entirely destroyed. Now, it doesn't mean it's something that's, it's good, and if you can avoid it, avoid it, and the human race is very useful, and I don't think that's actually going to happen to us. I'm optimistic, but I wouldn't assume necessarily that it's the most important thing to them that the physical human race doesn't get destroyed. Because, again, maybe that's part of our learning process, is that we have to destroy an entire race of ourselves until we say, okay, wait a minute, let's not do that again. Next time we have a chance to enter, to become part of some sort of physical race, let's do a better job. And actually, I wouldn't assume that that's never happened. Not with us, but, I would assume that there are races that have completely destroyed themselves. I bet you it's happened. And it doesn't matter to consciousness. Consciousness continues. Consciousness will always find a way. But that being said, let's be a little bit more optimistic, and hopefully, even though I suspect that we've had our own troubles in the past, and this is not the first human civilization. We know there's definitely something going on in Atlantis. There's something going on before then. There's probably been several human civilizations, and they've probably ended poorly. We've survived, so hopefully this time, maybe this time we can finally make it to the next level. So then, we get to the question, okay, so if they won't land openly, if they're not going to have open contact with us yet, because we're not quite right at the stage and we're not ready for it, but they do want to help us, well, how can they do that? And that's where I think you can look back, especially at the last, you can look back over all human history and see various levels of, you see something maybe in the historical record, you say, boy, that sure sounds like it could be alien contact. That's how we would describe it today, but you can't be too sure. But if you look back over the last 100 years, and especially like the last 80 years, ever since we developed nuclear weapons, I think you can spot this program of gradually increasing contact, slowly, subtly. It's like, the Zeta call it disclosure by stealth. It's slowly awakening more and more and more of humanity to the reality of something else being out there, and that something else being here, being already here and present on this planet. And by doing it gradually, they let us ease into it a little bit at our own pace. So whenever there is a sighting, it's always done in such a way that it's deniable. Ra calls this the law of confusion, or the way of confusion, that in the state that we're in, we must be confused, and they must allow us to remain confused. They cannot give us the final answer, again, because it affects our learning. The Zeta call this, plausible deniability. They say you need to maintain your plausible deniability. We can't take that away from you. So if you see something, it's always going to be in a way such that you can deny it. You're going to say, no, I didn't really see that. I must have been dreaming. I hallucinated. Maybe you see it once. And if you don't want to think about it, you can just ignore it. You can just go on with your life and go back to your normal day-to-day living if that's what you're interested in and what you're ready for. They're not going to necessarily force themselves on you. Now, that's one way that they gradually increase awareness, but they do more. There is the whole aspect of channeling, and they start to introduce communications. There's the aspect of the inspiration of individual people that they will teach you through different types of communications, in your dream states or things like that, and introduce thoughts and ideas in other states of mind that you may have. That you then, when you are awake, you will just feel that as an idea or an inspiration that you had. But that's another form of communication that's very subtle and happens at a very subtle and quiet level. Quiet, I guess, would be one way of describing it. It's in a way that you can also accept or reject. So it's a way that they can communicate with you, but you can just ignore it. So you can wake up in the morning, have had some interesting thought come into your head in the morning, but if you don't want to deal with it, you just go to work and you just forget about it. So you can see that they're trying various different, let's say, subtle, easy techniques, easy ways of slowly introducing people to the realization that there's something else out there. But it's always done in such a way that each individual can choose if they're ready for it or not, or how ready they are for it. There's also stranger things going on. It's so strange that it's you sound a little bit like a a lunatic discussing it, but it appears to be the case that when you think about the ways that they can communicate with humans, it's not just they're on the outside sending information to you. They can also come and be on the inside, as it were. In other words, the alien races can take part in incarnations. The way that this is typically done, it appears, according to the information that we've received from the Zetas, is that they will blend some of their consciousness with some of your consciousness. So in other words, a person who is going to be born will be approached, or the parents will be approached, as a spirit, will be approached by an alien race. And permission will be asked. This has to be always mutual, and there has to be permission. And the alien race will basically extend, one of its members will essentially join in the incarnation. That still creates a unique and unitary consciousness. When that individual is born, it is a singular consciousness that enlivens that human body. And that human is perfectly and entirely human. It is completely a natural human. It's just every human may have a different point of origin of their consciousness. It's not all going to come just from the spirit realm. When the alien races do this, it's like, imagine that your consciousness then would be, first of all, you as a human would have no idea necessarily. You would just go through, go about your business and go through your life just like everybody else. But there might be, you might feel an influence of some sort, or you might feel an attraction to certain ideas. You might be a little bit more open to these types of ideas that we're discussing. And that's because you're experiencing a different influence as well. And it's not just inspiration from, dream states. It's not just communication in the astral, which happens a lot. That when a human is asleep and they're in the astral, alien races can approach them. There can be a lot of communication. A lot of what a person might experience is because the consciousness that enlivens their body has an aspect of a human spirit and has an aspect of some other race. That could be a physical race. It could be an interdimensional race. And actually, much of the what we see as the abduction phenomenon, some of it is legitimate abduction. It's negative entities coming and negative beings coming and taking people against their will. That does happen because there are bad things out there. A lot of it, though, are races checking in on their own, essentially. Races that have taken part in a hybrid consciousness coming in to check on that human, on that person, because one of the members of their race that's them. They're incarnate, as part of that human experience. And so they're just kind of like checking in to see how everything is going and make sure they're okay. The reason that the person will interpret any sort of contact possibly as negative or unwanted or as an abduction is because in their normal waking state, their local consciousness may have no understanding of this. And they may not have reached yet a level where they're curious about it and they're researching it, or where they've really come to accept it. So they may experience that as external entities came to me and it scared me and, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, it's their own race that's coming to them. So there is a program going on right now. First we have just the gradually increasing contact with sightings in the sky, inspiration, communication in dream states, communication in the astral. But a lot of the communication that's happening in the astral is happening from the race to the member of their own race. And the human part of that consciousness doesn't necessarily understand what's going on. And so that, they may make up some story. They may make up a narrative in their own mind, or that narrative may be in part planted into their mind to help them, to not destabilize them, to protect the psyche of the human, which is a little bit fragile. But there has been, and it appears to be a very large program. The Zetas say they don't know how many people, but something like 30% of the population of the Earth right now has some element of an alien race that's taking part in the incarnation. And what this does is it helps those individuals to wake up, to become more interested and open in these ideas, which then helps the collective consciousness of the entire human race develop better and faster. Because from the outside, the races can't interfere because that would be a violation of free will. And they're overriding, what makes them positive. One of the overriding factors of the positive orientation is they always respect free will. So they are not allowed, they do not allow themselves to interfere externally. But if they come in, if they are born into the race, then from the inside, they can help the race to develop. And that's not a violation of free will, because then they are human as well. They are incarnate in a human body. The only danger with that is they may not wake up. Maybe they incarnate and now they blend with a spirit mind. They create this new, unique, unitary mind. Now it's incarnate as a physical human, and you just completely forget. And then you're off to the races, and you're running around, and you're dealing with the day-to-day life. So it's, they run that risk, and they run that danger of having an entire human life, an entire human experience, and possibly not really waking up and understanding why it is that they came and incarnated. But that is happening, and many people are waking up, and that is why we're seeing the level of consciousness of the entire planet. Even though maybe it's imperceptible sometimes, it is increasing. There's no doubt it's increasing. And it's an interesting question as to, well, why now? If we have been around for at least 100,000 years, 200,000 years in the form that we're in now, of modern biological Homo sapiens, but why now? Why in the year 2026? It appears to be the case that we've already had several cycles of civilization. We haven't made it. Right now, we're in a cycle of civilization where we've developed very dangerous technology. We've developed very dangerous weapons. And especially, I think, when we started setting off nuclear bombs 80 years ago, the alien races saw that we were in extreme danger of destroying ourselves, but we were also progressing rapidly in terms of our technological development, and that we were, imminently going to go out into the stars one way or another. And that was going to cause an issue for them as well. So it's like, on the one hand, they want to help us because they're nice and they're good people. And on the other hand, they realize that they can't have a bunch of maniacs like us flying around, this little corner of the galaxy armed with dangerous weapons. So that is when they undertook this program of increased sightings, gradually increasing the level of contact in various ways, including this program of hybrid incarnations. And it appears there's even the possibility of what the Zeta call a full construct, which is a purely alien consciousness that incarnates as a human. There's a lot of complications with that, and it's very, very rare, but that does happen as well. And in fact, interestingly, that's happened in history a whole bunch of times. The two most famous examples being Jesus and Buddha, but that's a topic for another day. Anyways, I hope this helps, guys. This is, once you start getting into this kind of stuff, this is where it starts to get really, really crazy. When you just talk about consciousness and everything is one source consciousness, a lot of people will come along for the ride for that. When you start talking about, hey, guess what? Aliens are incarnating as humans, I think you lose a lot of people. But this is just part of this path of us waking up to what's really going on and to the true reality. So it's crazy stuff. I know it was crazy for me when I first learned about it. It shocked me, and it took me a while to come to understand it and accept it. But when you really think about it, and when you think about what a physical race is, and when you think about your body as a vehicle for consciousness, then it's actually not such a big deal. It's like, oh yeah, consciousness could come from many different places to enliven this physical body and use it as a vehicle for experience and for learning. So why not? Why not have aliens come and incarnate? It's not as crazy as it first sounds. And even if it sounds crazy, too bad. You better get used to it, because it's happening, and we're all going to know, I think, in the not too distant future. So if you have any questions or anything, drop them down below, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.